Imagine working late into the night, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans, your body aching from exhaustion, while the rest of the world sleeps. Imagine doing it all alone, with no one to share the burden, no safety net to catch you if you fall. That was Sarah's reality. A single mom with nothing but her grit and her love for her son to keep her going. But one fateful night, in the empty silence of a high-rise office, everything changed. A chance encounter with a billionaire client would unravel a mystery so shocking, so life-altering, that Sarah's world would never be the same. You know that feeling when life keeps pushing you down, when every door slams shut no matter how hard you knock? That's where Sarah was, trapped in a cycle of struggle, praying for a miracle. And then, in the most unexpected way, it came. But here's the thing about miracles. They're never free. There's always a price. And what this billionaire asked of her, it wasn't money. It wasn't favors. It was something far more dangerous. I know you've been there, wondering if the universe will ever cut you a break, if your hard work will ever pay off. That's why this story isn't just about Sarah. It's about you. It's about every person who's ever felt invisible, who's ever been told they don't belong in the rooms where fortunes are made. Because what if I told you that the biggest opportunities don't come from luck? They come from being in the right place at the right time, and having the courage to say yes when everything inside you screams no. By the end of this video, you'll get the answer you came for. The truth about what really happened that night, why this billionaire chose Sarah out of everyone in the world, and the unbelievable twist that even she never saw coming. But here's the catch. Nothing in this story is what it seems. The wealthy man who walked into that office? He wasn't there by accident. The cleaning job Sarah thought was just another dead-end gig? It was a test. And the life-changing offer he made her? It came with strings attached. Dark, tangled strings that would force her to question everything she thought she knew about power, money, and the price of a second chance. So if you're ready to uncover the truth, if you're ready to see how one woman's darkest moment became her greatest opportunity, then keep watching. Because the next few minutes will change the way you see luck, fate, and the hidden forces that shape our lives. But be warned, once you hear what really went down that night, you'll never look at a cleaning closet, a billionaire, or your own struggles the same way again. And that's when things get really interesting. Sarah's life had always been a series of uphill battles, each one steeper than the last. After her husband walked out, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a 4-year-old son who deserved more than she could give, she took whatever work she could find. Waitressing, retail, even overnight shifts at a gas station. But it was never enough. The bills piled up, the eviction notices came, and the fear of losing her son to a system that didn't care about struggling mothers kept her awake long after her body begged for rest. That's how she ended up cleaning offices at night, invisible in the glow of her mop bucket and the hum of the industrial vacuum. Just another shadow in a city that never stopped moving. Then came him. Daniel Carter wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of rich that didn't even flinch at dropping millions on a whim, the kind of man whose name opened doors most people didn't even know existed. When he walked into that empty office at 2 a.m., Sarah assumed he was just another workaholic CEO burning the midnight oil. But the way he watched her, like he'd been expecting her, like he knew something, sent a chill down her spine. He didn't ask for coffee or directions to the conference room. Instead, he leaned against the desk, folded his arms, and said the last thing she ever expected. Asterisk, how much do they pay you to clean up other people's messes, Sarah? And what would you do for someone willing to clean up yours? Asterisk. The offer sounded too good to be true. A year's salary up front, a real home for her son, even a chance to go back to school. All she had to do was one simple job. But nothing about Daniel Carter was simple. The deeper she got, the more she realized this wasn't just about money. There were files she wasn't supposed to see, phone calls that ended the second she walked into the room, and a safe in his penthouse with a combination only 2 people in the world knew. And then there was his wife. Elegant, icy, and terrified of something she refused to name. But the real mystery wasn't what Daniel wanted from Sarah. It was why her. She was nobody, a broke single mom with no connections, no leverage, nothing to offer but her silence. So why did his enemies suddenly start watching her apartment? Why did her son's daycare teacher slip her a note with a phone number and the words, "Call if you want the truth," scribbled in haste? And why, the night before she was supposed to sign the final agreement, did she find a hidden folder on Daniel's computer with her name on it, alongside photos of her ex-husband, a man who supposedly vanished 3 years ago? The pieces didn't fit. The money, the secrets, the way Daniel's voice softened when he mentioned her son. Like he wasn't just making a deal, but settling a debt. Sarah had spent her life believing there were no shortcuts, no fairy tale endings for women like her. But now, standing at the edge of a choice that could rewrite her future or destroy it, she had to ask herself. Was this her lucky break? Sarah's hands trembled as she clicked through the files on Daniel's laptop, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across the penthouse office. The folder marked with her name contained more than just photos. It held bank statements, medical records, even a custody agreement she'd never signed. But it was the last document that made her blood run cold. A life insurance policy taken out in her son's name, with Daniel listed as the sole beneficiary. The dates lined up with the week she'd first met him, back when she thought his offer was just a strange twist of fate. Now, it felt like something far more calculated. The sound of the elevator ding snapped her back to reality, and she barely had time to slam the laptop shut before Daniel's assistant, Marcus, stepped into the room with a file of his own. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he handed it over. "Mr. Carter thought you might have questions," he said smoothly. Asterisk. "He wanted you to have this before you made any final decisions." Asterisk. Inside was a deed to a house. Not just any house, but the one she'd grown up in, the one her parents lost after the medical bills from her father's cancer drained their savings. How did Daniel even know about that? And why was he using it as leverage now? The questions multiplied when she spotted the sticky note tucked beneath the paperwork. Asterisk, ask me about the accident. The real one. Asterisk, her stomach twisted. There had only ever been one accident that mattered. The car crash that killed her parents when she was 17. The official report called it a tragic case of brake failure. But the note implied something darker. Was Daniel connected to it? Was that why he'd sought her out? Why he was dangling her past in front of her like some twisted test? The next 48 hours blurred into a nightmare of hushed phone calls and unspoken threats. Her son's daycare called to say a family friend had picked him up early, but when Sarah raced there in a panic, the staff just shrugged and handed her a note with familiar handwriting. Asterisk, he's safe. For now. Asterisk, meanwhile, Marcus kept showing up, at her apartment, her job, even the diner where she used to waitress, always with the same message. Asterisk, Daniel wants to help you, but you're making this harder than it needs to be. Asterisk, help? This didn't feel like help. It felt like a trap tightening around her. Then came the voicemail. A woman's voice, shaky but determined. Asterisk, Sarah, it's Lillian Carter. We need to talk. My husband isn't who you think he is, and if you care about your son, you'll meet me tonight. Alone. Asterisk, the address she gave led to a crumbling church on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. Sarah knew it was a risk, but with her son missing and the walls closing in, what choice did she have? She barely recognized Daniel's wife when she stepped out of the shadows. Her designer clothes replaced with thrift store jeans, her perfect hair pulled into a messy bun. He's done this before, Lillian whispered, pressing a flash drive into Sarah's hand. Asterisk. Other women. Other kids. He picks them when they're desperate, when they'll do anything for a way out. But you're different. You're the first one who ever made him nervous. Asterisk. Sarah's breath caught as she scanned the files on the drive. Police reports, missing persons cases, even a faded newspaper clipping about a fire at an orphanage decades ago. The dates matched Daniel's childhood. The names matched the women who'd vanished after crossing his path. And the photos. God, the photos, showed faces she recognized. Her son's teacher. Her old neighbor. Even the nurse who'd held her hand the night her father died. None of this was random. None of this was luck. Daniel hadn't chosen her because she was invisible. He'd chosen her because she was connected. But to what? And why was Lillian, of all people, trying to warn her? The church door creaked open before she could ask. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he lifted his phone to show a live feed of her son, sitting cross-legged on a plush carpet, eating ice cream like nothing was wrong. Time's up, Sarah, he said softly. Asterisk, Daniel's waiting. And trust me, you don't want to keep him waiting. Asterisk, the screen flickered, and for one heart-stopping second, she saw it, the painting on the wall behind her son. The same one that had hung in her parents' house the night they died. That's when she understood. This wasn't just about money. Or power. Or even revenge. This was about something far older, far deeper. Something buried so deep, even Daniel might not know the whole truth. And if she wanted her son back, she'd have to dig it up herself. Or the biggest mistake of her life. And by the time she found out, would it already be too late to walk away? Sarah's entire body burned with adrenaline as she followed Marcus to the waiting car, her fingers gripping the flash drive so tightly it left marks in her palm. The drive held answers, but she already knew one terrible truth. Daniel Carter hadn't just stumbled into her life. He had orchestrated every moment of it, from the eviction that forced her into night cleaning to the chance meeting in that empty office. The car ride was silent, the city lights blurring past as they drove toward the one place she never thought she'd see again. Her childhood home, now polished and perfect, looking nothing like the crumbling ruin she'd last seen a decade ago. Inside, Daniel sat by the fireplace, her son curled up asleep on the couch beside him, a blanket draped carefully over his small frame. For a heartbeat, the scene looked almost peaceful, until Daniel lifted his gaze to hers, and she saw the cold calculation behind his smile. "You've been busy," he said, nodding to the flash drive in her hand. Asterisk, "But you still don't know the real story, do you?" Asterisk. The truth came out in fragments, each piece more horrifying than the last. Daniel hadn't just known her parents. He had been there the night they died. Not as a bystander, but as the 17-year-old driver of the other car, the rich kid whose family paid off the police to call it an accident. The guilt had festered in him for years, twisting into something dark, until he began tracking her life from the shadows, convinced that saving her would erase his past. But it wasn't just about her. The other women Lillian mentioned? They were pawns in a sick game, a way for Daniel to prove he could play God with people's lives. And her son, the one thing she'd fought so hard to protect, was the final piece of his twisted redemption. "I wanted to give you the life your parents never could," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. Asterisk, "But you had to dig. You had to ruin it." Asterisk. Sarah's mind raced. The house, the files, even the painting. It was all a stage, a carefully constructed illusion to make her believe his lies. But there was one thing Daniel hadn't counted on. Lillian. As if on cue, the door burst open, and Lillian strode in, flanked by two detectives. The flash drive hadn't just held secrets about Daniel. It contained evidence Lillian had spent years gathering, proof of his manipulations, his payoffs, even the fake identities he'd used to cover his tracks. "It's over," Lillian said, her voice shaking with years of suppressed fury. Asterisk, "You don't get to hurt anyone else." Asterisk. For the first time, Daniel looked afraid. The police moved in, but not before he lunged for Sarah, his hand closing around her wrist. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Asterisk, "You'll wish you'd taken the deal." Asterisk. But the deal was never the point. As the cops dragged Daniel away, Sarah finally understood. This wasn't about money or second chances. It was about breaking free from the chains he'd spent years wrapping around her life without her even knowing. The media circus that followed was overwhelming. The headlines, the interviews, the sudden flood of support from strangers who saw their own struggles in hers. But the real victory came weeks later, when she stood on the steps of the courthouse, her son's hand in hers, and watched as Daniel's empire crumbled behind him. The house, the money, the life he'd gifted her? Gone. And she was glad. Because for the first time in years, she was free. Not because someone handed her freedom, but because she'd clawed her way to it. The twist came months later, in the form of a handwritten letter slipped under her apartment door. It was from Lillian, just 2 lines. Asterisk, "You were right to fight. And you weren't the first, but you'll be the last." Asterisk. Beneath it was a key and an address, to a small cafe, newly registered in Sarah's name, funded by an anonymous donor. The final punchline? The cafe was located in the same building where she'd once cleaned offices, the place where this nightmare began. Now it was hers. A place to rebuild. A place to start over. And as she turned the key in the lock that first morning, her son laughing beside her, she realized something. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's survival. And she'd just begun.